the long-range missiles that the Storm Shadow and then the ATACMS, I actually thought that they would give a green light to Ukraine. So it's a little bit surprised to me that in the end, they, at least for now, okay, we cannot say for sure, but at least for now, they're not doing that. Well, is it because they're afraid of a series of warning coming from Putin himself? Is that what happened?
I think that has played an enormous role. I mean, Putin talked about a state of war if this was done, and the reason he gave, which by the way the media in the West has not reported, is that these weapons can only be used with the direct involvement of Western technicians, military personnel, uploading data by hand onto the software that's used with these, the guidance software. And he made the point, if you do that, then your own people are participating in direct missile strikes against our country, and that is an act of war, and we will treat it as one. And in the past, the Russians have made clear that if this were to happen, they would reciprocate. They haven't made it clear how they would reciprocate, but they did tell the British some months ago that if the British missiles were used against Russia, then the Russians would consider any British military facility anywhere in the world a potential target. Just to say, so this is incredibly dangerous, and I think the Pentagon is taking this warning very seriously indeed. But beyond that, I think the Pentagon is saying, look, what is this supposed to achieve? These missiles are very few in number. They have relatively short range. The Russian aircraft and facilities are outside the range of these missiles. We're going to run enormous risks, and there are no gains. So what is this? What is the point of this? And I think that what happened is that the Pentagon put his foot down and said no. And some people in Washington went along with that. A lot of others have not. I mean, Blinken, who's the Secretary of State, apparently still keen on this idea and is telling the British to just keep lobbying for it. And, well, he might eventually prevail. So I wouldn't write this possibility off. But I think that there are reasons why the Pentagon said no.
Apparently, in the Chinese media, saying that the Russian ambassador in Washington to the United States, apparently he got quite a few phone calls from some retired diplomats, ask him how serious Putin is, how serious Russia is, with his words. And the Chinese media is saying, okay, those diplomats must be sent by Biden to truly get a feeling how serious this is. So I guess his message to them is, don't play with fire, something like that, I guess. So that probably played a role. Yeah.
I'm sure it did, actually. Now, that's very, very interesting, because I'm sure this story is true. It makes complete sense. It's not been reported in the Russian media.
Okay.
I think that I don't doubt the story, by the way. It's completely logical. But I think what has happened is that it's a further sign that the Russians are briefing the Chinese very closely about what is happening. So I think that's an interesting story, and I didn't know about this, and thanks.
The other thing also interesting, you probably find interesting, is apparently during the meeting, Biden with Starmer, Biden was saying, okay, if you want to go ahead with Storm Shadow, we support that, but we will hold on to our own ATACMS, something like that. And then Starmer was like taken back a little bit, like, okay, that's not what I planned. It's not something we would want to do alone, at least not now. What do you take on that? I think that's probably true also.
Yes, it probably is. Only one must be a bit careful, because it could be that this is a story that the British are floating. That we're telling the Americans, if you don't want to do it, don't worry, but we'll just do it. And obviously we need, because it appears, and this is what the British media was saying, that because the data, the guidance data, has to come from American satellites, and in order to upload it, you have to use American proprietary software. American technicians would have to be involved. So that, that the British might have been trying to sneak the Americans into this by coming up with this idea. But what is indisputable, and it is all over the British media here, is that the British were shocked by the American reaction. They were expecting that they would come out of that meeting in Washington with some sort of agreement from the Americans. Blinken apparently basically told them that the Americans would say yes. And the Foreign Office, the British Foreign Ministry, was much more skeptical and advised by Starmer, look, this isn't a good idea. The Americans don't really want to go here. Pull back, draw back. And apparently he ignored their advice. This is in the British media, by the way. The Times had a big article about this. And when the British came and they found the Americans saying no, they were absolutely shocked. And there's been an enormous amount of recrimination about this in London. So, and if you see the pictures and the film of the meeting, before the delegation started, what struck me is that the Americans were absolutely stony-faced. I mean, they didn't look at all pleased. Biden was looked clearly angry and frankly rude. Mind you, he's often looks angry and rude. But the other members of the delegation, the American delegation, really didn't seem at all happy. That was absolutely my impression.
And okay, the same question, what's next? Because Putin also orders the military to boost the troops now to 1.5 million. That's a lot.
Yes, it's an awful lot.
So it just seems like that is also getting more and more tense, even though for now, at least, they're not going to allow the Ukrainians to use those long-range missiles to get into Russian territory. But like you said, it's not the end of the story, right? So what do you think is going to happen there?
Right. Well, I mean, the decree from Putin increasing the size of the Russian army is in fact to some extent looking backwards, in the sense that what happened was that the Russian government began a major recruiting drive to increase the size of the Russian army in January 2023, and it's been continuing steadily at a rate of about 1,000 men a day since then. And that has now brought the Russian army to roughly the level that this new decree says. So he signed off on this decree, to recognizing that this is the size of the Russian army at the moment. My understanding is that the intention is to continue the recruitment process until the end of this year, and then it will stop. And it's principally intended to build up forces in order to finish the war in Ukraine. The Russians want somewhere around 800,000 to 1 million men, as they see it, to complete the war in Ukraine. By the end of this year, they will have it. Then the war will be brought to an end. And then I suspect that the Russians will decide to start scaling their army down, because this is a very, very large military, 2.5 million men altogether, for 1.5 million in the actual army, 2.5 million if you add all the Air Force, the Navy, all of the other things. It's a very, very large military establishment for a country of 150 million people. So I think Putin will want a lot of those men to go back into civilian life, rejoin the economy, start manning the factories where there's labor shortages. And I think for that reason, I think this is conceived of as a temporary thing, actually. But it does tell us a lot about what the Russians are intending to do. And I think that it indicates that the Russians are now very, very serious about winning the war in Ukraine, that they're going to go all in. They're winning on the battlefronts now, but they're preparing for the big hammer blow that is going to fall at some point in the next 6 months.
Yeah, and then the question is, if they are, if the Ukrainians really cannot last, because I guess the US wanted it to last at least until November, right? But what if they they can't, and then like you said, maybe they will eventually will allow the long range missiles. My question is this: I mean, what does is that going to make any difference? We've been here before. There's all kinds of the so-called wonder weapons, right? The Leopard 2 tank, the Patriot air defense system, the HIMARS. I mean, there are plenty of those kind of wonder weapons, but in the end, none of them are really game changing. They only prolong the war, right? Do you think the long range missile will make any difference?
Every single military official analyst who's looked at this has said that they won't. And I mean, that begs the question of why, in that case, do this incredibly reckless and dangerous thing if it's not going to succeed. Every single Western weapon system that's been supplied to Ukraine has failed to achieve the objective that people expected it would achieve. If we're talking about the Storm Shadows and the ATACMS, they've already been used many times in Ukraine. They haven't succeeded in isolating Crimea, destroying the Russian Black Sea Fleet, destroying the bridge between Crimea and the rest of Russia. They've achieved none of the objectives that people said. Most of them are regularly shot down by the Russian air defenses. And I see no reason to think that just a couple of hundred at most, probably less than 100 actually, missiles launched against Russia are going to make any difference in terms of the military campaign at all. The fact is that we are in the end game, and I think this is a thing to say. I mean, the economic situation in Ukraine is now critical. There are fears again of hyperinflation. The IMF is drawing back. The military situation is disastrous and getting worse. An important Ukrainian town called Ukrainsk was captured by the Russians yesterday. Another one is about to fall. I mean, things are going very, very badly wrong. The Russian army is getting bigger and stronger all of the time. And the result is, and this is what is driving all of these very dangerous plans, we see that the Western powers are looking for some sort of key that is going to solve this problem for them without they themselves having to make concessions to the Russians, which they don't want to make. So we have Storm Shadows and ATACMS missiles used in deep strikes against Russia, which apparently or supposedly are going to scare the Russians into making concessions. We have talk about looking for a diplomatic off-ramp, but when you analyze it, they're not proposing anything serious. Of course, we can't talk to the Chinese, because if we do, that would be, giving the other superpower, the China of all countries, the enemy, a voice in this matter. So we're trying with the Indians instead. The Indians don't seem too keen at the moment. Anyway, there we go. So all of this is going on. But I'm going to say something else. This is also a dangerous situation for the Russians, because they are on the brink of a military victory. What no one is clear about is what their plans are once that victory is won. And this is an area where I think we are probably going to see the Russians eventually turning to the Chinese, not for military assistance and that kind of thing, but to discuss with China what they're going to do once they've won the war, what they're going to do with Ukraine. Because I'm not sure that the Russians themselves know. And I think they will need to talk about this with their friends, first and foremost, their friends in Beijing, but also in Delhi and in other places.
Yeah. Yeah, we will see. I mean, yeah, I agree. I think it is, where we are going, heading into the end of the game, but it is when it's very dangerous. Yeah, because there will be desperate moves that, yeah.